Welcome to the Unwashed Asses, episode 89, recorded for Monday, March 4th, 2019. Now, continuing our series in the top critically acclaimed movies of the past, 100 years. The little lady and I dipped into Psycho last night. I've seen Psycho, the original, before, but it was ages and ages ago, to the point where I didn't really remember much of the movie except for, of course, the main highlights. And then the Vince Vaughn remake, which I forgot was a thing until we started putting this list together. Again, if you're interested in following along and doing your own watch through of these movies, we got the idea from Current Geek with Tom Merritt and Scott Johnson, where every month they'll break down one of these, and it's kind of a curated list, but it's pulling from multiple lists of the top 100 movies of all time. So we're doing one a week in an effort to kind of catch up to them, but definitely give their show a listen. It's a really good take on each of these movies and a pretty robust breakdown without being overly analytical, whereas mine are just quick 15-minute blurts. But no, last week we did Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. This week is Psycho. So again, I had seen it ages ago. It was one of those late night Saturday Svengoolie runs. God, I love Svengoolie. I need to see if he's still around. I always like the schlocky late night horror shows like Svengoolie or Elvira, and even to an extent, but which is in a different vein, Mystery Science Theater 3000. There's something, I don't know, it just brings back good fond memories of kind of growing up in the Chicagoland area and having these shows on, and or you're sitting in a shitty apartment. Just something about it makes it feel like home. It was something I had done with my son too when his mom and I had first split, and I'm sitting in an empty apartment with literally the only furniture I had was a lawn chair, a TV tray, and then the TV. And we're sitting in this empty apartment, me and my, he's only like 8 or 9 months old at the time, Saturday nights watching Svengoolie on MeTV. So that would be like they'd show Wonder Woman, and then Star Trek, the original Star Trek with the fuck are their names? Spock and Kirk. What are their real names though? Leonard Nimoy and can't think of it. I want to say James Spader, but I know that's totally wrong. It might come back to us. It'd be Wonder Woman, Star Trek, and then Svengoolie would pop on, and it was just always, I don't know, it was something that I had grown up doing, and so it was nice to do with him. I should actually see what channel that's on, but it doesn't matter because we drop them off on Saturdays now. Don't pick them up on Saturdays. Damn it, forgot about that. Anywho, that's not what we're here to talk about. Psycho was, of course, one of... let's see if we can get a little more technical here. If we can dredge up more details. Give me a minute while I do a quick Google. You'd think I would have taken care of this. But you know what? I just thought of, being a little more professional on the fly here. Okay. Let's see. Alright, yeah, so it was one of Hitchcock's, released in 1960, and starring Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, John Gavin, Vera Miles, and Martin Balsam. And it was based on the 1959 novel The Same Name by Robert Bloch. This was a sequel, not a sequel, but a follow-up to Hitchcock's previous film, North by Northwest. And despite the being released in 1960, we had movies in color. in the 1950s. It was an established thing. It wasn't so much of a gimmick any longer. But to see Hitchcock go back to black and white, it was an artistic choice, and one I think played well for the movie itself. And it ended up being considered now one of Hitchcock's best films. So everybody always knows like the shower scene where Norman Bates comes in and stabs the lady, what was her name? Marion Crane. Like that, we have that iconic scene, and then to a lesser extent, the scene where Marion's sister, what's her name? Lila. Finds Norman's mother in the fruit cellar and spins the chair around, and there's that horrific looking dummy. Not like bad quality, but shockingly scary, especially when you consider the time. But I had entirely forgotten the original plot of the movie being one of theft, where again, Marion is working for a real estate company and ends up stealing $40,000 from a new client. He had come in with cash. He was going to buy some property for his daughter, and that's kind of how the initial plot kicks off, is that she steals this $40,000 saying, oh yeah, I'll take it to the bank and I'm not feeling good, could I just go home? And then she just kind of vamooses. Now, the entire reasoning for her stealing the money is that her and her boyfriend, Sam Loomis, it starts off with them kind of in bed. They've just finished doing the dirty, and again, for 1960, it's kind of a ballsy move doing something like this, because they want to get married, but they can't afford to do it, because Sam's in debt, mostly because he's recently divorced. He's paying alimony, and for the period where wholesome values were a thing, doing something like recently divorced adults, not necessarily an extramarital affair, but they're definitely, fornicating in the classic sense, definition there, where they're not married, they're banging, and they won't, they're sinning. It's dirty and it's wrong. But they want to get married, and they can't make it happen until his debts are paid. And there's this whole line about, let's go get married and we'll mail the alimony check and you can lick the stamp, just like a semi-dirty fuck you to his ex-wife, which, I mean, in this day and age, we're kind of familiar with that, where it's not so shocking, but I was definitely not taken aback, but startled at how blatant it was with this. So the story progresses. She steals the money and takes off on the road. Her troubles begin because she's also an idiot and a bit of a bitch. She just behaves very erratically, and rather than playing cool and trying to act natural in situations, she just gets super jittery and, again, acts like a bitch to those involved, which makes people super suspicious of her. First and foremost, on the road, before she even gets out of town, she stopped at a stoplight, sees her boss and the client walking by, and she just starts throwing like, oh, shock, oh, wow, why did you see me faces at her boss, instead of just playing it cool, like, waving at him, or, just kind of remaining neutral, because he stops and he does like a double take, because she's already told him, hey, I'll take this shit to the bank and then I'm gonna go home because I've got a headache. Now, the idea was that her boss and the rancher were gonna, I don't even know if he's a rancher, he just fits that type, big Texan, we're gonna go get drinks afterwards. So again, she botches it right out the gate. She gets on the road and drives for, I don't know, all night before she eventually decides it's time to pass out, and decides she's going to sleep on the nice, big, long, comfy bench seat of her ancient automobile. That's when a cop shows up, knocks on the window, is like, hey, what the fuck's going on here? And she begins babbling and constantly repeating her story and trying to get away from the cop. It's not natural, and that immediately raises his suspicions. And the officer, he's a fairly intimidating fella, behind his jet black sunglasses. And, he lets her go, but because she was suspicious as fuck, of course he's going to follow her. Where does he follow her? To a fucking car dealership where she decides, oh, well, I'm going to dupe the cop by buying a new car with different license plates. And she keeps trying to rush the salesman through the sale. And again, it's just not natural. And I get it. She's nervous. She's scared. She just stole a shitload of money for a man that she loves. And she's uprooting her life. And they're going to be on the run. And it's a scary thing. But she is so vapidly dumb that, of course, it's going to fail because she doesn't know how to play anything straight. So the salesman, he gets super curious about her, and the officer ends up there. He shows up at the lot, but in a weird Terminator sense, he's walking too slow to kind of like catch up to her. He's not trying all that hard. She even tries to leave the lot in her new car without her luggage. The mechanic has to stop her and like, hey, you forgot this. And it's at this point she kind of barrels down the road. Now, it's worth mentioning that her and Sam live in different towns. She is in Phoenix, and he is in Fairvale, California. So, about 15 miles away from Fairvale, she gets hit by a nasty rainstorm and has to stop at the iconic Bates Motel where Norman and his mother live. And from here on out is where the movie really kind of picks up and starts becoming more, not necessarily memorable, but this is where people remember the movie is, oh, we have the Bates Motel, we have Norman, we have his mother, we have the murder in the shower scene, and then everything kind of plays out from there. And I gotta say, I was very pleasantly surprised with Norman. Who played him again? Was it Anthony Perkins? Yes, it was. He was very charming and likable, and that's a hallmark of a good, not necessarily serial killer, but it's the unnerving bit because it disarms the person. It makes you realize, oh, well, they're a human being too, and they're actually charming and likable, and I shouldn't like somebody that does these horrific acts. It's kind of like when you see all these posts about Hitler being actually charming. It's unnerving. So anywho, now that we've got that edited together, yay, surprise job in the middle of the morning. Where was I? So we were talking about Norman being creepy because he's charming, and then we got introduced to his mother. That's right, and then he made the sandwiches, and it's during this conversation that Norman's creepy side comes out, where we find out he's unhinged. And I think we've all had moments like this where we're talking to somebody and they seem pleasant and charming enough, but something either sets them off or the cracks start to appear and you realize they're just a little bit nutty. And at that point, it's up to us to decide, well, are they nutty enough to, like, it's a fun little quirk, or are they batshit insane? And in the case of Norman, he's talking about stuffed birds and how, a mother is a boy's best friend. Like, he progressively gets worse and worse and worse to the point where our female lead here she's unnerved, and you can desperately feel the awkwardness and the tension and how much she just wants to be out of that room, because not that she really has anywhere else to go. It's almost like the rainstorm that happened because it lets up while they're eating dinner. forced her there. It's just like, oh, this is convenient just for the sake of plot. But the characters comment on it, and I was almost waiting for him to say something along those lines of like, oh, it looks like fate, brought us here, or brought you here. But it's at this time that we find out, Norman's mother is all about protecting him and also just belittling him and making him feel lower than, Satan's asshole, just berating him and essentially insinuating that she's a whore and he should get rid of her and this, that, and the other thing. So dinner wraps up awkwardly. She goes back to her room and starts getting ready for a shower, and it's at this point that we get the creepy factor for Norman up to 11 because he takes off a painting in his parlor, and sure enough, there's a hole where he's spying on her in the shower. Now, this is the part that gets me because we never really see in cabin 1 where our heroine is staying what is in place of that hole, if it looks natural, if it's just a hole in the wall, because on his end, it's easily the size of a quarter. Like, it's noticeable. And the walls are pretty bare and white in the room, and so if you're looking around, it wouldn't be hard to spot this fucking eyeball staring at you, especially since it's a small room and the hole has a dead set, it's like straight ahead. Here's a shot of the bathroom. So clearly, Norman's a creepy perv, and this is where one of the effects really starts to take hold for me is the movie's in black and white, but Hitchcock plays so well with the contrast where the shadows are really dark, but he still makes the eyes pop, and not in an unnatural lighting way like we get with Morticia Addams and Addams Family movies. More so, they seem to glow of their own volition, but it's creepy without being otherworldly, and it rides that fine line. And we see it early in the movie with what's her face's character? God, I need to pull up my notes again. With what's her name? Marion. With Marion as she's driving, then we see it with Norman, and then later we'll see it with Marion's sister Lila, and it's done just to such a tremendous effect. It was honestly one of my favorite things in the movie. So as she's in the shower, I realize that Marion is a fucking psychopath, even more so than Norman, because how she operates a shower alone is just fucked up and wrong, where she gets into the shower, then turns it on, and immediately has a maniacal grin on her face. One, nobody just turns the shower on while they're in it. You have to let the water get adjusted to the right temperature. You turn it on, you cautiously stick an arm in after like 30 seconds and see how it is. It's just as necessary. Nope, this fucking psychopath jumps right in, turns it on, and immediately like she just stomped an orphanage to death with puppy lace shoes. She's just disturbed. And I enjoy a shower as much as the next person, but I've never had that much delight being in the shower. It was weird and wrong. And it was then grateful for me when we see Mrs. Bates come in and stab the shit out of Marion. And this is obviously the most iconic part of the movie, but it's kind of, and Rachel had commented on this, kind of lackluster compared to how things are done nowadays. And I compare it to my reading Lovecraft, where 100 years ago this shit was fairly dope, and it was the cutting edge and super creepy. And nowadays it's like you can see things coming from a mile away because it set things up for later generations. Same thing here with Psycho, where it's 1960. Sure, the movie's rated R, but R back then is more like PG-13 now. It's very toned back. We don't actually see a knife even penetrate the skin. In some shots, we see the knife and her torso, but there's no blood. And the knife, it never once has a drop of blood on it. It doesn't penetrate her. It's just like the knife is right in front of her torso. But, sure enough, she gets stabbed to death. And I think it's still effective in the sense of we have the creepy shadow coming up to the shower. You see it through the curtain. The costume design for Mrs. Bates is simple yet still effective. And the acting by, what's her face here? Marion. Janet Leigh, I'm going to assume, is effective. It works. It serves the purpose. We have the iconic scream. The music kicks up, and that, I guess, side tangent here. The music, I didn't realize, we had the main Psycho theme pretty much play throughout the entirety of the movie. Whatever decision was made there, they're like, nope, we got it in one. We're just going to repeat it over and over again. And it's not even like, what show reused their music theme, but they just changed the tempo? Anywho, it's like start to finish, it's that theme. And it's at this point then that, the everything kind of spirals out of control. We have Norman cleaning up after his mother, dumping the body in a swamp behind the hotel. And maybe I'm just not familiar with the geography, but, I've been in the Southwest, and I don't really remember swamps being super prevalent, especially in, between Phoenix to California area. That's pretty much all desert. And having a swamp right there is just unnatural. It pulled me out of the movie. So events now kind of spiral out of control for Norman, where Marion's sister shows up to talk with Sam. Sam being Marion's boyfriend, the one she was going to see. We have a private investigator pop up. Apparently, Marion's former employer is upset but doesn't want to press charges. They just want to get the money back. So the private eye's job is to find the money. And so ultimately we have a chain of events where people just keep showing up at the hotel, and Norman's mother keeps murdering them until, we get the shock reveal twist that Norman is actually his mother. It had been believed that she had killed her husband, her second husband, years ago, and then poisoned herself, when in fact it was Norman because he had an obsession with his mother. And we get, I feel, one of the first real psychological twists in a movie. It's easy to kind of call and predict it, and so it was hard to keep a straight face watching it with Rachel, who had never seen it, because she, beat for beat predicted how the movie was going to go, and I'm trying to, not misdirect her, but not, confirm her suspicions, because I still want her to go on that ride instead of, yeah, you nailed it halfway through. So, again, predictable, but it's more about the journey than it is about, the destination. And again, we see things in their infancy, but they're done so well. Like when we have the psychologist explaining and kind of breaking down what happened to Norman, yeah, you can kind of piece it together. But the way the monologue is delivered and the theory is solidified is done so well. And it provides a good backstory, because with Norman, everything's been word of mouth by different characters. But for him telling it through his mother's perspective to the psychologist, it was unique at the time, but it worked for this movie. Normally situations like this, I'm pulled out of it and I lose interest, and it's very jarring. The most notable example I can think of is Silent Hill movie, the first one, where we've gone through all this horrific stuff, and our main character gets to the point where they find the person who's doing all this stuff in Silent Hill, and the movie just slams on the brakes and is like, we're gonna tell 20 minutes worth of backstory, and it's jarring, and it takes you out of the mood, and you're out of the scene. I should rewatch that. That was a good movie. Anywho, it worked for Psycho in a way that I didn't expect. And we're left again with Norman Bates sitting in a room, but now his persona is full on switched to being his mother. And it was just so wonderfully told, start to finish. Everything was kind of wrapped up, no real need for a sequel. It makes me wonder, because there was, let me look here. We got sequels, 3 sequels, a remake, made-for-television spin-off, and a prequel television series. It was, I didn't see a need for that. In the movie, they mention, would you have any missing persons cases? And the sheriff's like, oh yeah, we had 2 of them. And psychologist's like, I bet you if you check that swamp behind the hotel, you'll find them. So having a TV series didn't necessarily make sense. Granted, I've not seen the series, but based on what the movie sets up, there's not much meat on the bone. Sure, we'll have the psychological abuse and bizarre relationship between Norman and his mother, but she's not really going to coach him into being a murderer. That's something that kind of happens naturally with his character. And then sequels, and Norman, while kind of being a serial killer, he's not the person who's actively going to seek people out. It's more of you walk into the spider web, and then that's when you're going to have problems. We did have a remake with Vince Vaughn, which was a shot-for-shot remake. While good, it didn't really do anything different, because apparently the director was so terrified of, tarnishing Hitchcock's name and wanted to take such great care. He was too ultimately crippled by that fear and didn't do anything innovative or new with his movie. So while good, it wasn't great. Just kind of was whatever. And that's one of the pitfalls of doing a remake, kind of like I've talked about it before, Weezer's latest album, where it's just nothing but cover songs. They don't do anything really innovative or unique with the songs, and ultimately it falls flat because of that. Same thing with the Psycho remake. So, and compared to like Doctor Strangelove, I'd probably rank Psycho ahead of it, just because it was a more engaging ride throughout. While some parts were disjointed, they didn't stick out as much as like the character of Doctor Strangelove. And I'm liking, I guess, movies kind of set in this era, because they're more focused on story. There wasn't so much in the way of effects. In fact, the effects for murdering the investigator and Marion were very basic and almost laughable nowadays, but because of those limitations, there's not so much not so much effort being pushed behind them, and more times devoted towards the story. And it's kind of how I look at video games too, where I'm more keen on the story than what's the effects of the game are. So I'm pleasantly surprised at liking these as much as I do. I'm curious to see, when we go back in time further with like modern times, how that plays out, because it's more of a silent film, and again, it's going to be a bit more limited because the narrative isn't going to be told as effectively, or it might be surprise. But my only real basis with silent films are the few Buster Keaton movies I've seen and Nosferatu. And while they're quaint in their own right, I don't know how well that'll translate. So it'll be interesting to see. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Don't know what we're going to watch next week. I think it's my turn to pick. But otherwise, if you have any, thoughts of your own about Psycho or Hitchcock movies or anything at all, questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, critiques, or otherwise opinions, shoot the show an email, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. Again, theunwashedasses@gmail.com. And of course, this year, all we're asking for in terms of support is tell a friend. Let somebody know about the show. The only way this show grows is through you and word of mouth. And I appreciate that. So let some folks know they can get it wherever they get podcasts. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond, head over to patreon.com/0and09, pitching $1 or $2 a month. Dabbling with the idea of doing like a monthly sticker pack. I'm trying to find good pricing on that now. So keep an eye on that. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next time.